Linda, Beyonce. Hi.
Hi.
How are you guys?
Good. Good. How are you?
Always good.
Yes.
Yesterday afternoon, you had a session, a presentation with a church and some church elders. Um, please tell us about the experience. What was the presentation about? Or what church did you go see? And yeah, talk to us.
You? Well, do you want to start it off since you had the invitation?
Well, yeah, yes, we received an invitation. I personally received an invitation from the Catholic Church. You know, where they had their national gathering from all.
It's like an AGM.
Yeah, it's like an AGM. Like they had deacons, priests,
Bishops.
the bishop.
Bishop.
It was like a room filled with probably 150 people or so. Nuns, and it was just, yeah, it was a space where you, upon arrival already, we were set aside to and given a protocol about what is permitted and what is not permitted in the space. So, and
it gets me to that thing where you literally want to start a conversation about how primitive the church can be. Like, you invite people and you're asking, well, what is it that you want from the church, right? And then when you're walking in, you're getting all this protocol about what you need to say, what you can't say, and yet you're being told, speak, tell your story. But we all know when they sit there, they want to ask you that question about your sexual practice and not really about who you are. But yet you're not even allowed to speak about sex. And then it just takes me to all these other whole discussions on how, sexual reproductive health and rights is affected by the church itself. But okay, let's go to that discussion on like the presentation in itself. What do you guys want?
yeah, I was presenting with Wendelinus because he was asked to speak from a gay man's perspective, and I was asked to speak from a lesbian perspective. But I personally felt it was imperative for one to speak from an LGBT perspective because the T was the main issue that mainly came out in the space.
Absolutely.
And I think having Beyonce there sparked the house into a frenzy, and I think the two key speakers just didn't matter. It was just about you, and it was just, it was. I think sitting up there on the altar, next to the bishop, who is so energized.
Archbishop.
Yes, Archbishop. Yes, thanks for that. But it was just an amazing feeling because, to me, it's just what I felt, and the energy from Archbishop Nashenda was, my child, speak. I want to know who you are. And what he also had this thing about, let the people ask the questions the way they are. But there was this whole process of where you looked at and said, you can't go there. The diplomacy and the political consciousness surrounding that space was just amazing, in the sense that you also realize that your story matters because you could feel the energy. You could actually see people connecting, but you could also at the same time feel intimidated in the space because people would like frown and like wonder what the hell are you talking about, and it was just
Well, for me, like the whole discussion felt like it was based around identity issues, expression issues, like questions that would come would more have to do with, look at the questions like, okay, so if you're a gay man and you're married to another man and your husband dies, like what do you become now all of a sudden? So they assume because, well, one must be male and one must be female, the other one must be called widow and gender.
Yes, and also, I mean, do you remember that they addressed us? We made it clear that Wendelinus made it clear I'm a man, and I made it clear that I'm a woman, and
the pronouns switch.
They immediately, when they asked questions, our pronouns were switched. I was seen as a guy, and Wendelinus was seen as a woman, and Beyonce was just a conspiracy. It was just a whole equation of what the hell are you,
Well, there was this, I think it was a deacon, after the presentation when we were leaving, he walks up to me and Mayday. And then he goes, so you're both women? And I go, we're both women. And then he giggles. And then he stops, man, so you... And we're telling him, no, ask the question. Ask that question, because I know where you want to go. And then he goes, well, I want to understand. Because, and then I said, look, the only difference is that female came in a female body. This one came in a borrowed body. Like, it just borrowed somebody else's body. It doesn't agree with what it was born in, but it identifies as a woman. And it's like, oh. And then there was this other one that goes, you see, in the bedroom, my wife has a vagina, I have a penis, and so what do you guys do? You know? And we're like, you see, but that's the problem, because it's never about who we are, it's always about what we do.
And I think that's the part that everybody wanted to ask questions around, but it was a restricted space about you can't speak around the bedroom issues, but you can speak with caution whether you do really have a spiritual life and what it is that we are having an issue with as gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and intersex people. And I think what was more intriguing for me in that space was when one of the deacons got up and said, you know what? I've seen in my community and I've lived around people who are like those two kids that are standing up front there. But it's important for us not to judge, but accept these kids as they are, because they come from our own flesh and they are our own kids. Who are we to question the creation? And do you remember the roar in the room? Like,
because I picked that up.
What?
Like when he said, it is what God had created. And you do not question what he had created, accept it as what it is, you know. And I think it was also when, what was it, that gentleman that said he wanted to just speak in Oshiwambo
oh yes,
about what the native languages
when he
and
was
what
saying
they
that,
call.
yes, he was saying actually, he was saying like, look, I'm going to say it. You guys do not want to be, in my native language, we knew that people who do not act within their gender norms, we call them as shengas until today. But today you are standing up front then telling us that the term shenge is offensive. So what do we call you? What is the name? Because with us in that moment, it was not about looking at it derogatory, but it was a label given to a child that is not within the conformity. And that was an intriguing moment, because to actually say, look, I'm sitting here as a faith leader here, but I also have this cultural part of mine, and I'm having you up there standing there also embracing culture and religion. But now, what language can we use so that we are able not to push you away? And I think, yeah.
For me, it was the acknowledgement that it has always been there. And we had to come up with a name for it, culturally, traditionally. So it took me to that discussion where people say homosexuality is a Western thing. But it's not even like, it's there. It's in our cultures. It's been there for years. This is the term that we've used for you. So how dare you now come find it derogatory, you know? Like, it was just an
It was
interesting...
moving for me.
Yeah.
So guys, sort of like in closing, the ask from the church was, what do you want from the church, right? And you've mentioned a few things. How do you sort of think the church received your ask? And what would be your closing sort of statement towards that?
I think for me it was well received. The atmosphere was relaxed. It was receiving. It was open. Even afterwards with engagements, you could tell people were open about talking and engaging with people that are LGBT. And they were encouraging to say, you know, we need more of this. Is there a bigger session that you can offer to help us understand? So I think for me, it is definitely a door that has been open for dialogue. There were exchanges of emails, numbers, so we're definitely taking that up. to sort of say, look, the church has opened the door. It's time for us to have the dialogue. And as activists and as leaders, I'm saying we are open. We're welcoming that call. It's time for people to really experience their spiritual upliftment for what it is.
I think for me, having had this conversation with the Catholic Church, it's always been the Lutheran Church. And I shared the story around our experience within the Lutheran Church when we had this conversation with our parents. And I think the message initially, what our ask was around the importance of refraining from a debate, because the topic of homosexuality always brings the issue around debate. And we were trying to say the importance is dialogue. That's the first entry. Now, within that form of dialogue, it's also important for us to understand what tolerance means and also what acceptance means in this line of religion. But also broadly, because of our foundation as people who come from families with foundation of love being a key message, hence us being connected to the church to advance that spiritual connection. And I think that was key for us. And then that led us into the importance around, remember, the enabling environment. That in order for us to have an enabling environment, we shouldn't be entering the church and have an outerlang stand there at the back and say, you are not properly dressed to be in this church. We made those practical examples of our experiences in the church because that is what brings a problem. And also we said that it's important for us to realize within the church that there are many of us who are very active and leading the choirs, that, and also ensuring that everything is done in order. But broadly, what was interesting for me is the fact that they wanted to know what the statistics are in this country, what the population ratio is around homosexual or LGBT people. And that was a very tricky question because it came with a very academic language of trying to say you need to give us a percentage rate in order for us to be able. And that initially says the church wants to know what are the numbers that we're talking about if you're talking about a community that is existing. And the fact that they and the fact that they don't see or have people come out with these issues at the church. So I think for me is at the end of this process was the lack of information that is also not available for churches to advance. And that is why with the walkout, when we left, there was an outcry for information. But we were not allowed to bring copies of papers in to distribute. So the email exchanges was so much to an extent that some people, some of those deacons and who were around there, they said it's my first time ever seeing somebody speaking around it. And that initially said we have a lot of work to do as a community. So we also took responsibility to say we've internalized a number of things and preconceptions around the church. So we're hoping that dialogue would be able to start where the church gets to understand their key challenge around identity and expression, because the issue of sexual orientation was not a biggie. So the ask was very simple around dialogue, creating an enabling environment, ensuring that the message of love gets advanced, and also that we ensure that LGBTI people within the church get treated equally and also receive equal opportunities. And I think that was also the message that the Archbishop said in the end, to actually say this is the beginning of getting to understand our communities and hoping that there would be more of the LGBT community coming to church and sharing their stories. And I think that was the crust of that dialogue, I think.
Amen.
Hallelujah.
I'd like to thank you guys and have a lovely evening.